Hello and good morning, Connecting Point Church family. It is Friday morning, which means I yet again have another opportunity to share in some devotional thoughts out of our Following Jesus Bible reading plan from the YouVersion Bible app. Today our reading came out of 2 Chronicles chapter 16 through 18, not all of 18, but some of 18. And then from Psalms and also from 1 Corinthians. And I know lately I've been talking a lot out of 1 Corinthians, some conversations out of our Psalm or Proverb reading, but ultimately have not had a whole lot to say out of 2 Chronicles or 1 Chronicles, just because it is very repetitive to what we have already seen in 1 and 2 Kings, as well as some of what was seen in 1 and 2 Samuel. But today, I would like to talk about what we read in 2 Chronicles, not just what we read today, but also what we read yesterday as well. And that is with respect to this story of Asa. And you have this king of Judah, Asa, who, in chapter 14, verse 2, so this was yesterday's devotions, it says, Asa did what was good and right in the eyes of the Lord his God. And so, again, if we think back to kind of the things that we have read in the past, there was like this kind of downward spiral that took place, and essentially from Solomon on, it was almost as if the kingdom of Israel was on this downward spiral, this downward descent into disobedience and kind of a walking away from God. And so this isn't a long ways away from Solomon. Let's see, I didn't do it ahead of this devotional, but I think this is only, 2 generations away from, like 2 kings from Solomon. So this is still kind of early on in the process. And yet there is still some disobedience that occurred beforehand. But we get to Asa, and it says that he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. And this is good. And then you see that there's like also in chapter 15, so yesterday again, like there's this Asa's reform where he essentially just completely depends on the Lord and seeks the Lord. And it says that the Lord was found by them. And that's just kind of this beautiful picture where it's like the people are looking after God and trying to find what they're supposed to do. And God honoring their seeking and honoring their dependence on Him allows Himself to be found, which is pretty incredible. And he was so faithful to God. I kind of made note of this, that he was so faithful to God that he was willing to forsake his familial relationships. At the end of our devotions yesterday, it says that he deposed his grandmother from her position as queen mother because she had made a repulsive image for the worship of Asherah. And so you have this picture of a man, of a king, who is fully dependent on God, who is faithful to God, in the midst of his reign, in the midst of all this power that he has. He is still choosing to pursue God and recognize God as the source of this, and God as the thing that can maintain this, and God is the one who has established the order for Judah and will continue to maintain the order for Judah and the peace for Judah. And at the last verse of yesterday said there was no more war until the 35th year of Asa's reign. So essentially there's peace on all sides. There's another verse that says that better. 15. Chapter 15, verse 15 says, so the Lord gave them rest on every side. And so there's just this peace that exists. But then we come to today, and we come to chapter 16 about Asa's reign. And it's in my Bible, it's entitled Asa's Last Year, or last years. And there's this shift that takes place, right? There is this king, there's Baasha, the king of Israel, who has come up against King Asa. And so there's this opposing military that is coming to march against him. And in the past, he depended on God. In the past, he sought God's direction and God's guidance and God's wisdom in the midst of military conflict. And this time, he does something different. And I actually wrote in my margin, I said, he sought God until it got hard, and then he turned to man. And so he had been seeking God all along, but then all of a sudden, it's like there's this switch that flips. I don't know if it was just this random fear that he had in this moment or what, but it says in chapter 16, verse 2, that Asa took the silver and gold out of the treasuries of the Lord's temple and his own palace, and he sent it to Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, who was ruling in Damascus. Essentially, I'll summarize what it says further, in an effort to obtain him as an ally to come and help him fight against Baasha. And so, rather than depending on God, he turns to man. And the crazy thing, and I mean, maybe there's really nothing here, the thing that really got my attention is what he used to obtain Ben-Hadad. He used the silver and gold out of the treasuries of the Lord's temple. So not only did he turn his back on the Lord, but he took the very things that were used and given in worship of God in order to obtain the help of man. And so it's just this, I don't know, it's a turn that doesn't make sense whatsoever. And as I thought about that some more, there's some more that I want to talk about, but in bringing this into our lives, I think that when we sit and read this, when I sit and read this devotional, it's easy for me to question Asa and say, well, why on earth would you do that? Like, you have followed God your entire life, and now all of a sudden you're choosing to turn to man. That's so unlike your past decisions. Why are you doing that? And obviously, we just have what is written down, and so there's probably other things that have happened in life. But then if I think about my life, if we think about our life, the truth is, I think we can all confess that we've seen this happen before, and maybe even some of us are in the midst of that right now, where for our life, for a portion of our life or whatever, we have turned to God in moments of difficulty. We've turned to God when we're not really sure where to go. But then, even though that's something we have done, we encounter this new situation, this new problem that we've never seen before, and rather than turning to God, we start grasping at things and trying to figure it out for ourselves. And I guess again, it's just kind of timely for where we find ourselves today. And it's easy as church leaders, we are in uncharted territory. As people who live in America, we're in uncharted territory, and I think it's very easy for us to begin to grasp at how to control our surroundings, how to control our essentially what it looks like to worship. It's easy for us to grasp at things and really try for us to be the ones to make a decision on what it looks like to step forward, instead of taking the time to take a step back and saying, okay, God, like what do you have for us? What are we supposed to do here? How can we be faithful to you in the midst of this uncharted territory that we find ourselves in? I know that, again, if I'm honest with you, I've done this before in the past where I'm encountering something different, and I do everything that I can to control it, to find the answer. Early on before I became a pastor, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I had been running from being a pastor, even though I felt like God was calling me to this life, and I didn't want it. And so I tried everything I could do to get away from it, and I was really good. Some of you guys have heard my testimony. I was really good in school, and in academics I was excelling in, and in college I thrived, and I did pretty well in research that I was a part of, and it was like I was going places, and everybody around me told me I was going places. And so it was like I was trying to find the answer to my future on my own, because I didn't like God's solution. And so I did turn to man, essentially. I turned to myself. I turned to the approval of those around me, and yet those doors continued to get slammed in my face until finally I had nothing left but to fall on my knees and say, okay, God, like, what do you have for me? If we go back to Asa's story, I mean, it makes sense what happens here. Again, I wrote in my margins, chapter 16, verse 7. You get this: Hanani, the seer, comes to Asa, king of Judah, to talk to him. And I actually wrote, "Yep, you saw this coming," because he says, "Because you relied on the king of Aram and not on the Lord your God, the army of the king of Aram has escaped from your hand." And he reminds him. He says, like, remember in the past when you faced these overwhelming odds, you relied on the Lord and he delivered them into your hands, and yet you did not do that this time. You didn't commit to him this time, and so that's not going to happen for you this time. And it's like Asa then, he's faced with two choices, right? He can repent and he can turn to God, or he can do what he did. And essentially it says, where'd it go? The events of Asa's reign from beginning to end are written in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. In the 39th year of his reign, Asa was afflicted with a disease in his feet. Though his disease was severe, even in his illness, he did not seek help from the Lord, but only from the physicians. And then in the 41st year of his reign, Asa died and rested with the ancestors. And so it was like he had two options. He could have repented and thrown himself at the feet of God and sought his wisdom and direction. Or he could have, like, puffed up his chest even more and depended on himself even more and just really dove into this pride and arrogance. And that's what he chose to do. And, you know, church, we are at this place where I truly believe we are being faced with a decision ahead of us. And again, I'm kind of pulling this devotional out now, and I'm looking at this and what it might mean for us as the people of God. I think that there are definitely some individual applications that can be pulled out of this from Asa's story, and I think you are going to be the best judge of that. And so, you know, if there's a place in your life where you feel like you have decided to depend on man over God, you know, I think it's time for you to humble yourself and fall at God's feet. But if I am taking this and kind of looking at it from the perspective of us, the people of God, I think we're at this place in our lives because of where we are right now. I mean, because of essentially what time is offering us with respect to the pandemic and the leaders around us and what the governmental leaders around us and what they're asking us to do. We're at this place where we can puff up our chest in pride, and we can say we are going to do this our way. Or we can step back and we can humble ourselves and we can say, Lord, what is the way forward? We don't want to step where you're not stepping. That song comes to mind, where you go, I'll go. Where you move, I'll move. When you stay, I'll stay. I will follow you. And perhaps that needs to be the posture that we, the people of God, assume. As much as we so desire to be able to meet back in our sanctuary and for things to be, quote, normal again, perhaps this is an opportunity that God is presenting us with to lay ourselves at his feet, to seek a more faithful way in worship. Not that what we have done is wrong, but maybe we're on to a new page. And so maybe the best thing that we can do as God's people is seek to be on the same page as him. And so rather than trying to beat our heads against the wall and fight so hard to go back to what we had, maybe it's time we embrace the reality around us, the uniqueness around us, the opportunity of humility around us, and we just fall at his feet and we say, all right, God, you know our heart. We desire to worship you, to honor you, to glorify you, both as connecting point, but also just within the community that you have placed us in. And so, God, what does that look like? How can we do that best? How can we best be faithful to you and bring honor and glory to you for what you're deserving of in our life, but also for what you're deserving of in the life of the people around us. So I hope you will take some time today and you will reflect on that. You will think about that. If I'm honest, as one of your leaders, I would love to hear if you have some insight and some ideas as you have sought God of maybe some ways that we can continue to faithfully bring honor and glory to God in the midst of where we find ourselves today. I hope you guys have a great Friday, and I look forward to seeing you guys on Sunday. Remember, it is Faith Promise Weekend, so we'll see you Sunday, and try to stay cool in the midst of this crazy weather. We'll talk to you later. Peace out.